Right, bear with me a second. Okay. That's started now, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee meeting on Wednesday, the 12th of January. I'd like to wish you all a happy new year and a welcome back after Christmas. May I remind everyone present, the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future use and viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. If a participant wishes to speak, please can they put their hand up if they can be seen on screen, or use the raise hand button. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues to the chairman or Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has any difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chairman or Democratic Officer know. If they have a webcam, then they should try turning this off, as this will help with the broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth so they can at least hear and be heard. Okay, so agenda item number 1 is apologies for absence. Do we have any?
Yes, we do, Chair. It's from Ms. Heather Smith, tenant representative.
Okay, thank you. Any other apologies?
Not for myself, Chair, but I don't know if members have any.
I can't see any hands up.
Sorry, Chair, can I just let you know that Councillor Bronwyn Brooks is having difficulties. You might know already, but she's still having difficulties.
Yeah.
No worries.
Just to let you know, Councillor Aviette, my colleague's going to try and give her a call now and see if she can help her get on. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So agenda item 2 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of December of 2021. Are we happy with the minutes?
Yeah. Move we note.
Okay, seconder?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 3 is to receive declarations of interest. Do we have any?
Yes, from me, Chair. It's on agenda item 6, draft tenants and leaseholder participation strategy. Just the fact I'm a council tenant.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Aviette. I can see that Councillor Cave also has her hand up if you'd like to speak.
Yes, also, Chair, on the same item. So I'm a leaseholder and therefore I declare an interest.
Okay, thank you.
Just to let everyone know, Chair, the Councillor Aviette and Councillor Cave's declarations only for a personal interest. It's not a prejudicial one, so they can obviously still remain within the meeting when that item is discussed. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so item number 4 is the presentation, which is the Wales Illegal Money Lending Unit, and this is going to be presented to us by Liz Emmons. If you would like to go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Now, I think Mark is just going to help me get my presentation up and running.
Right. Okay, Liz.
Bear with me just a moment.
Yeah, it should be the share screen option again on the top right-hand corner.
Yes, it's uploading.
Okay.
Well, I say that. Let's. My progress bar is moving, so.
Yeah, it's coming up now.
It's coming through slowly.
Lovely.
There we are, we've got it.
Excellent. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Noswaith dda bawb. Diolch yn fawr iawn am eich gwahoddiad. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to the committee this evening. I did provide a briefing document some months ago, which I think you may have had the opportunity to see, But what I'm going to do is just summarise the information in that briefing document, perhaps expand on a few points, and then, depending on the time available, I'll be very happy to take any questions. So I am Liz Emmons from the Wales Illegal Money Lending Unit. I will tell you a little bit about who we are. WIMLU, Wales Illegal Money Lending Unit. We were officially launched on the 25th of February 2008. We are an agency whose remit is entirely concerned with loan sharks, with illegal lenders, and we are currently funded by a levy on high-cost credit providers. You'll be familiar with these in terms of doorstep lenders or perhaps payday lenders, buy now, pay later, those sorts of lenders who are legal but do pay a levy to the UK government, which then funds us. We operate throughout Wales, throughout all 22 local authorities. We're currently hosted by Shared Regulatory Services, which is obviously Cardiff, the Vale and Bridgend, and hence our connection with yourselves. Where the unit is made up of investigators and client liaison officers. The investigators, it won't surprise you to know, will look at information with a view to compiling the necessary evidence in order to prosecute a loan shark. Those of us in the unit, there are 3 of us who are client liaison officers. We approach the offence from the point of view of the victims. So our focus is on victim support, both with needs that we find, it may be health problems, debt problems, but also supporting those victims through the court system if they choose to give evidence. I'm just going to touch on the question of what a loan shark is. I've put up the definition. It is a very dry definition. It's the Financial Services and Market Act 2000, which probably doesn't feature in many people's bedside reading, but it is actually the statute which regulates lending in the UK. And the Financial Conduct Authority is tasked with issuing authorities to lend. So banks, building societies, doorstep lenders, individuals on some occasions can apply to the FCA and obtain an authority to lend. Loan sharks is a term we use to cover those who do not have those authorities. And it's a very important distinction because somebody who does have an authority to lend will have to comply with the rules and regulations. And if a borrower defaults on a loan from a legal lender, there is a legal process, an enforcement process. A loan shark is not bound by any regulations, and the way that a loan shark will enforce repayment is therefore going to fall outside the legal framework. I'm going to move on to a slide showing some of the characteristics of loan sharks that we prosecute. Do loan sharks provide written agreements? Very rarely. Do they give receipts to their victims? It's highly unlikely. They are very likely to use intimidation and violence in enforcing loans. We prosecute for illegal lending, but the additional offences that we prosecute have included assault, criminal damage, kidnap, blackmail. So those are all means that a loan shark will use to get the repayment that he or she is looking for. They generally will target vulnerable individuals because, frankly, they see them as easy victims. It's an extremely cynical offence. It's not random. A loan shark will know that somebody has got financial problems, and they will target those individuals. And we do find a very high prevalence of vulnerable people being targeted by loan sharks. In one 12-month period, we found that 85% of loan shark victims had either a recognised physical or mental disability. That's the nature of loan sharking. They look for people to exploit. The interest and default charges are shocking. We hear the phrase over and over again, oh, he said it was double bubble. So you borrow 50, you've got to pay back 100. If you can't pay back the 100, I'll have 20 quid a week till you can give me the lump sum, and on it goes. And that means that the interest charges rack up horrifically. We have to calculate them for the purposes of prosecution. And some of the figures we've come up with are in the region of 600,000% APR. They bear no relation to any sort of legal lender. So how do loan sharks find their victims? You'll see that business models is in quotation marks there. I'm afraid in Wales, we generally find that it's the old-fashioned connections within our communities. When I speak to loan shark victims, they'll say, oh, well, she was a friend of my nephew, or my ex-husband used to play darts with him, or there'll be those sorts of community links very often. And I'm not being just politically correct with my he or she. It's a very female-friendly crime. We prosecute a good many female loan sharks. And that may be because the way a loan shark operates will often have an element of grooming to it. So, for example, it may be a friendly female who you know through a church group or even at the school gate who says, listen, love, I know there's a problem. I know you're short of cash. I can help. So, as I say, we do find the word grooming does describe a lot of loan shark activity. A little bit more about who can be affected. I've already touched on that point about loan sharks targeting those with disabilities. But the vulnerabilities can range, for example, from literacy problems. Somebody who can't read and write is going to be very drawn to a loan that doesn't involve paperwork. So that's an obvious chink in the armour, if you like, that a loan shark will look at. Somebody whose first language isn't English or Welsh, who feels perhaps culturally isolated and is willing to trust someone from their own ethnic community, for example. I've brought with me just one case study. It's not in the SRS area, but it does contain quite a lot of detail which illustrate points of how loan sharks operate. You'll see a substantial cash seizure there, which is usual, where we obtain a search warrant and go into a loan shark's home. We do now take cash sniffing dogs who will find money that has been hidden. And this was a fairly typical raid where a substantial sum of cash was found. You'll see that the loans in some cases had gone on for over 10 years. He was not going to let go of his victims once having got hold of them. The guilty plea, basically the evidence was absolutely overwhelming. He had to explain away £30,000, which he couldn't. There was surveillance footage. There were witnesses willing to come to court. He was advised to plead guilty. There is a prison sentence of which he served half. But I do sometimes get comments at this point, well, that doesn't seem very much. But if I show you my second Jenkins slide with the acronym POCA, it's Proceeds of Crime Act, which I would say is possibly a more fitting punishment for this crime than a short prison sentence. As you'll see there, we recovered over £90,000 of his assets. And so in addition to the £30,000 cash, the judge was satisfied that a further £60,000 of Jenkins's assets were ill-gotten gains, if you like. And as I say, it's a philosophical point. It's not our decision. It's a judge's decision. But I would say that losing over £90,000 of his money may actually have hurt him harder than a short term in prison. We don't get to choose compensation for the victims. We support victims in their applications. Again, it's the judge's decision. And in this case, he made fairly substantial awards to some of the victims. Any other assets, there's a very complicated pie chart where various government departments get a slice of it, which I suppose as taxpayers is fine for all of us. And we get a very small amount to use on awareness raising activities, which obviously there's a certain poetic justice to using criminals' assets to raise awareness of their crime. And that's something that we do as a unit. Within the SRS area, this is just some of the recent activity within the SRS area which the unit has undertaken. I'm just checking my notes here because since this slide was produced, I have checked with colleagues what the updated position is. The Cardiff Mail who was cautioned had lent money to a woman which she wanted to use in her business. When she wouldn't come up with all the money that he was demanding, he started harassing her, and there weren't direct threats of violence, but she was put in considerable fear for her safety. The second bullet point, that's my error. This was, or it still is actually, a male lender under investigation in the Vale of Glamorgan. He lent £3,000 and required over £6,000 in repayments. That is continuing as an investigation, so I won't say more about that. And that is also the case with a Thai female in the Cardiff area currently under investigation for illegal lending. The debt collector in the Cardiff area under investigation for offering loans when enforcing debts. We are hoping that victims will come forward to speak to us there because we need more information before we can proceed with that investigation. But again, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to go into more detail there. When any investigation is current, obviously, we have to keep it confidential. Where do we get our cases from? And this moves me towards the reason why this is such a good opportunity for me to speak to you. We are an intelligence-led unit. We need information to come into us. And where does that information come from? Sometimes directly from a loan shark victim, but more often it will be from, say, a support worker, tenancy support. We have very good relationships with tenancy support within local authorities as far as possible. Similarly, advice providers such as Citizens Advice. Also enforcement agencies. Yes, the police, we work very closely with the police, and we are an asset in their eyes because we take something off their desks, if you like. it's an offence they don't need to deal with because we are the specialist agency. But for example, within the local authority context, it's always helpful for me if I can speak to, say, rent arrears officers, council tax arrears workers, because once you start to engage with an individual about why they're in arrears, the reason may become apparent. And I'm going to move on. Ways to engage with us. If you suspect loan shark activity, either in your knowledge, within your knowledge, or something that a resident in your ward raises as an issue, the best way to make contact with us is that hotline number. And I think I can ask Mark to distribute this material to you so that you'll all have that. That is actually answered by a member of the team on a rota. We've kept it to that slightly old-fashioned tech because we don't want people going through to call centres. It'll actually, I think I'm on in 3 weeks' time. It's 24/7, and we will discuss with anybody who phones us what's the best way to engage with us, how to allay their immediate fears, basically what we can do to help. That's what it is all about. But the second way to engage with us, on a less urgent level, if you like, is taking advantage of the free training that we offer. Because all these groups I've mentioned, the support workers, the tenancy support, the advisors, rent arrears staff, how do you find out what the signs of loan shark activity are? I was previously employed by Citizens Advice, and I can tell you no one ever came into Bureau when I was there and said, oh, I've borrowed from Lenny Loan Shark. But with hindsight, the signs were there. People who talked about my friend who helped me with my debt, or, well, yes, I know I owe council tax, but I've got to pay Linda first. Those are the signs. That's putting an hour's training into 2 sentences, but we provide it free of charge. It's part of our core remit. I used to go to people's offices and talk to them. Now I appear on Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, anything else at all. And I would urge any of you who think it may be relevant to you, to your colleagues, to groups you work with, to take advantage of it. As I say, it is free, and rather than me presenting to large varied groups, I'm much happier that an individual group approaches me so I can tailor the content. For example, if I'm speaking to mental health support workers, the content would be different from speaking to rent arrears officers. So I would urge any of those organisations to contact me, and I'd be delighted to set up training for them. My last slide, I think, is, there we are, diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd. And as I say, depending on time constraints, I'd be delighted to take any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you for that. That was very nice, Liz. Thank you very much. I can see that Councillor Perks has her hand up, followed by Councillor Aviett. So, Councillor Perks, if you'd like to go first.
Thank you, Chair. I know you said within your presentation that the size of the money lending is difficult to say. I just wondered if there is any sort of figures about what sort of prevalence there is within Wales of money lending, or if there's anywhere that we could look at, you know, sort of gather that information from.
I don't have the most up-to-date statistics yet. I can certainly find out what the most recent 12 months has shown. Perhaps I could supply that to the committee within the next few days.
Oh, yes, please. That'd be lovely.
Right.
Okay, Councillor Avia, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Liz, thank you for bringing this to our attention as well. Just a few comments, really. Back in the 90s, I think my ex-mother-in-law was involved with this, and I can't believe it's still going on, because she used to like borrow 50 quid and have to pay £100 back, and that's in the 90s. And I think it's still going on. Somebody in my street had 2 books, 5,000 and 3,000, and the stress was unbelievable. And that was a young woman. I don't know if they're older or younger now, but this was a woman loan shark. And the other thing I was wanted to say, companies like Provident, that was around when I was a teenager, I think, and my friend's mother used to pay him for school uniforms. Can you just enlighten me on those kind of companies as well, please? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. In terms of females being involved, it is a very female-friendly crime. There is generally some male, if you like, muscle in the background. So we'll hear something like, oh, yeah, she's fine, but I wouldn't mess with her partner. So very often there'll be that sort of context for a female lender. And so far as lenders, Provident have actually stopped doorstep lending within the very recent past. It's turned out not to be an economically viable model at the moment. But those sorts of high cost lenders are legal. I don't think any of us working in the world of financial inclusion are fans of those sorts of lenders, and I would include payday lenders, buy now, pay later, those sorts of lenders, because it's a very, very expensive way to borrow. We, as a unit, part of our remit is to encourage and support people into safe, affordable credit, which, no surprise, we encourage the use of credit unions wherever possible. We work very closely with the credit unions. But from our point of view, we would rather somebody borrowed from a payday lender than from a loan shark, because at the end of the day, if you're in trouble with a payday lender and you go to Citizens Advice or another debt agency, they will be able to assist you with affordable repayments, and there will be a recognised process. Whereas if you borrow from that nice woman you met in the pub, you have no idea what sort of territory you're straying into. So we're not fans of expensive lenders, but we know that there's worse stuff out there.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, Councillor Nugent-Finn.
Thanks, Chair. Great presentation. Thanks ever so much. When you talk about your encouraging victims to come forward, because I take on board what you just said, it's very difficult in all the circumstances, and you're far more aware now of the telltale signs and everything else. What then in terms of support, or how do you signpost, and how do you encourage them to come forward in the first place?
That's really interesting, because there is generally a very high level of shame regarding this sort of debt, but also where there's a loan shark, it's fear. And so what we would say is talk to us, and the sorts of support we can offer range from assisting with immediate debts. I mean, if I meet a victim for the first time, I might find myself putting a call through to a landlord saying, I can see you're on the point of evicting this person. There's an economic crime here. Can we just hold back for a while? It might be something more urgent, I have been involved in cases, for example, where when we've spoken to a victim, there's a real and immediate danger, and the police will assist us at that point because we're not a blue light service, but we have been involved, for example, in arranging urgent hotel accommodation for somebody who simply has to get out of their house there and then. Those are unusual cases, but we are authorised and we can do that. In the slightly longer term, I have helped families to relocate, families who just say, I just don't feel safe on this estate anymore. And that's why we were set up with the integral client liaison officers, because it's recognised that the victims of this crime are not only vulnerable, they're often very fragile and very frightened. So there's a lot we can do, yes.
Well, thank you so much for a fantastic response. I mean, it's spot on. Yeah, exactly what I was anticipating, and to hear that coming with additionality is just really reassuring. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let us know as elected members what we can do to support this as well. Okay.
Much appreciated.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Andrew, if you'd like to speak.
Yeah, I was just going to inquire, and thank you for your presentation. Do you know how many loan sharks are currently operating in the Vale of Glamorgan?
How many loan sharks we know about in the Vale of Glamorgan? I think we have currently 4 investigations or inquiries underway, but sadly, I'm afraid there will be a much higher number of loan sharks operating. We do feel sometimes that we only see the tip of the iceberg. I'm afraid loan sharking is widespread throughout Wales and the other countries, obviously.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Oh, yes, sorry, go ahead. Gina, if you'd like to go ahead, sorry.
Yes, thank you. Fantastic presentation, thank you. You shocked me though, and I'm thinking to myself, I can't believe that no wonder there is so many of them, because if all they're going to get is a few months, this is how it's going to be. But I'm really glad to hear that you're going to hit them where it hurts most, money.
Yes. I mean, the headlines always go with the prison sentence, and I do understand why that is. But I've been with the unit a long time, and I have, as I've seen our financial investigators go through these individuals' accounts and their families' accounts and bring all of this to the judge's attention and get really substantial sums of money confiscated, I agree. I think it is hitting people where it really hurts. These are greedy people, and I think losing £90,000 arguably has a bigger impact on an individual than 7.5 months in prison. It's arguable, but it's the most satisfying part of our job, I would say, even though it's less headline grabbing than a chunky prison sentence. Thank you.
Okay, Mike, you want to come in?
Yeah, just to thank Liz for the presentation as well. I know we had a sort of brief discussion at an earlier meeting, Liz, about the role of neighbourhood housing teams potentially and our income advice service. There's a really important role here, I think, about not only just flagging that your service exists, but to act as allies of the unit, making sure that we're asking the right questions, making sure we're giving the appropriate advice, being perhaps a friendly ear as well, given relationships that we may have with some of our tenants. They may open up to us.
Yes.
And particularly I'm thinking with our income service, our money advice service, because on the one hand, we're trying to maximise people's incomes there. So we are talking around benefits uptake. We're talking about access to grants and other things. And we can have a more friendly conversation, if that's the right word, because we're already in somebody's home or we're discussing with somebody assistance. So I know we're going to take up your offer of training for our neighbourhood teams, and as I say, I think I'm mindful that much of this activity is probably being targeted towards vulnerable people. The most vulnerable people within our community tend to be those on our estates, on our housing estates. I think we've got as I say, we want to be a major ally of the teams there. I was just going to reflect on really perhaps whether your view, are we at the tip of an iceberg, or are we climbing that iceberg at the moment? Because I'm mindful of the position that our residents are going to be in, given their financial circumstances, certainly in the next 2 years, perhaps with the recently announced or discussions around the price cap and other issues. I just wonder what your feeling is in terms of capacity and resources to do what could be a tsunami.
Yes, thank you for that. And you've absolutely hit the nail on the head in terms of partnership working. We rely on departments, on agencies like yourselves to be our eyes and ears and to understand what we're doing and to feel confident in contacting us as and when this information is disclosed to you. And it's just knowing how to, feeling confident to follow up that, you know, when somebody says, well, yes, I've got a friend who helps me out with money. Oh, tell me a bit more about that. You know, those are the sorts of things that we want teams to feel confident that when you're discussing income and outgoings with an individual, that the alarm bells will ring and that the right approach will be made. In terms of where we are, yes, I was at a cross-border meeting the day before yesterday, with my equivalents in Scotland and England, and we're all feeling slightly, you know, adopting the braced position, if you like, because in all our nations, the COVID impact, the economic consequences of COVID have just made everything worse, everything that we normally deal with. You've had, as we know, COVID has divided the nation in terms of those who are actually better off working at home and those who have lost their jobs, whose health has been affected, members of their family's health has been affected. And these are all factors that we are feeling it's likely there is going to be an increase in work for all of us. I haven't said anything about the growth in online lending, Reddits and subreddits. We're moving slightly out of my comfort zone there, but we are carrying out research, again, with people confined to home, doing more stuff online. It's very likely, and in fact, we do have some evidence. My colleague in Northern Ireland, they've already carried out some research showing that loan sharks are adopting more and more online platforms. So I don't think we're going to be short of work, no.
Okay, thank you very much. I can see Councillor Perks has a hand up again.
Oh, hi, Chair. Is it okay if I just ask one other question? Something just occurred to me then as you were talking about sort of online sort of stuff. I just wondered whether these loan sharks, whether they actually so we saw that they kept hold of people's post office books. Being online, are they actually accessing people's bank accounts directly as well to take out money? Do we know whether that's happening?
Occasionally we've come across victims who have actually given loan sharks their banking details to enable them to do that, obviously under threat and intimidation. Yes, that is something. It used to be post office books, now it's post office cards and bank cards, where loan sharks bully their victims into handing over the card and the PIN. But yes, that's exactly right. Loan sharks are becoming more tech savvy. Of course they are.
And that makes it even harder to get rid of them, doesn't it? Whereas a bank card or something like that, you can cancel quite easily. But if they've got access to your bank account, it's scary.
And as I think I've made clear, they are a fairly savvy bunch, unfortunately.
Okay, I believe Colette would like to speak.
Yeah, hi, it's Colette from Citizens Advice. I was just going to sort of add on with regards to when we're dealing with clients that have debt with, the majority of clients are turned to these loan sharks do. It's sometimes difficult to, unless the client opens up and, is very honest that, they've got a debt to a loan shark. Sometimes difficult to identify that when we do in the standard financial statement. And the reason being is, we look at bank statements and look at what's coming in and what's going out. The client tends to withdraw cash and then pays the loan shark via cash. You can't see it as a direct payment on the bank statement. And that's why it's very important that you get your explanation right in the first instance and, and build that trust with the client so that, they can open up to you.
Yeah. That's really helpful. I remember back in my Citizens Advice days, sometimes I'd be working with a client and think, well, there's like a black hole in their money. It doesn't make sense. I'm not understanding. And now I think, there are questions I could have asked. Absolutely. And that's why it's so helpful for us to speak to advisors like yourselves and just explore some of the clues that might actually be there presenting themselves.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We know there's something going on and we suspect what it is, but obviously we can't come out and just, ask the client that. We can sort of, do some probing explanation.
Yes.
But yeah, it is down to the client to sort of give you that information. So.
Yeah. But I think it's been a while probably since I spoke to Vale Citizens Advice, so I'll do a quick plug for my training.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be great.
Catch up with you. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
And Councillor Aviat.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a quick one, Liz. What's the procedure then when you identify a loan shark? Is it SRS or police you go straight to, and then what happens, please?
It's us actually. So our investigators, let's imagine I get a call on the hotline saying from someone in Citizens Advice saying, look, I'm here with a client. She's borrowed money from Fred and he's going around to collect the money on Friday afternoon. Then ideally, one of our investigators will speak to that client as quickly as possible, and we'll ascertain the level of the danger. If there are real and credible threats, then the police will engage with us immediately so that safeguarding is paramount. On the other hand, if it is a less immediate threat, so, well, I've got to pay him, I keep paying him, what should I do? Then we'll work with them, get as much information as we can. The investigators have privileged access to police databases, and we'll generate enough information that we can either get an authorisation to carry out surveillance, which the magistrates will grant if we have sufficient information, or proceed straight to a search warrant. And we do those as soon as we have enough information that the magistrates will issue one to us, and the police will support us there from the point of view of actually effecting the arrest, because our investigators, although they're all ex-police officers, they can't actually arrest, so the police officer will do the arrest. We then do all the rest of the work. So it's quite a tight little unit, and we've got good understanding with all the police forces in Wales, not surprisingly, given that all the investigators are ex-cops.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Colette, you still have your hand up. Do you want to speak again, or is it a legacy hand?
I apologise, I forgot to lower it, sorry.
No problem, just needs to double check. Thank you. Okay, so if we have no more questions, I would like to thank Liz very, very much for coming on in and giving us this presentation today. It's been extremely illuminating. I believe we're going to have a poster sent around looking at the chat and some information. So that I look forward to receiving that. Thank you. You may enjoy the rest of your evening if you wish. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's been really helpful opportunity for me as a representative of the unit. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So agenda item 5 is the draft local housing strategy 2021 to 2026. And this is Mike Ingram and Nick Jones, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. It's just going to be me tonight, Chair. I've given Nick the night off, and Fareed's helping with one of our later reports. Thank you very much for having a look at the local housing strategy 2021-2026. It's probably our most important strategic housing document, other than the report that Fareed is going to introduce as the next report. It's hugely important, effectively, because it underpins our strategic housing enabling role, not just for council housing, but the housing market as a whole. The strategy looks at private housing, it looks at housing solutions, it looks at demand, supply. It's a hugely important document. It underpins a number of other strategic documents like the LDP, delivers direction in terms of things like supplementary planning guidance, and also supports the council's corporate plan. It's also minded in recognition of future generations and other strategic areas of council business. None more importantly than and as we know around the table, around the room, the importance of housing and the impact on other determinants such as health, and, as we've just been discussing, issues around poverty, financial inclusion, amongst others. The report was originally presented to Cabinet on the 6th of December. I think for those members who've had the opportunity to read the report through, you'll note it's somewhat retrospective in terms of its outlook, and that's because the strategy is a 5-year strategy and was originally formed during consultation exercises in 2020. Now, at that time, there were about 80 or 90 of us in one room, having face-to-face presentations, workshops, and little did we know a month or so later that would be probably the last time that any of us took part in a conference-style presentation as we did. What we did, we engaged a professional facilitator, and you can see within Appendix 1 of the document the outcome of that consultation, and you'll see huge range of contributors were asked to review the previous strategy and to think about what the next 5 years needed to look like, and what sort of actions did we need to concentrate on in order to achieve that. Clearly, the council isn't the only key partner in delivering the strategic aims that you'll see before you today in the strategy. We're not responsible for all areas, as I mentioned. There are colleagues in health that will need to contribute to delivering some of those aims together with RSL partners, private sector landlords and others. So it's an important collaboration between both statutory sector and third sector and other partners. For those of you who are looking at or have never seen the local housing strategy previously, it is a legal requirement, a statutory requirement on us to produce a local housing strategy, and as you can see from the report under Section 87 of the Local Government Act 2003. And the strategy before you builds on our previous successful strategy. I think it's fair to say that the priorities that are within the strategy probably are not that much different than the previous priorities that were identified, because they are issues around access to housing, around increasing the amount of affordable housing, around housing solutions advice and guidance. But I think throughout the document, we were also cognizant of issues coming down the line. If you remember, we were probably in the middle of our Brexit discussions, or Brexit had been agreed at that time, and we were concerned around how that would impact in terms of some of the work that we were doing. We were aware of austerity and some of the issues that we were continuing to see as a result of the austerity measures and the economic downturn, you know, from the previous 5 or 10 years. So I think we were cognizant of that. What we weren't cognizant of was COVID. And regardless of that, those issues that are there in relation to homelessness and around preventing homelessness and, as far as possible, eradicating homelessness, those are in there regardless, and they will still be themes that, even with COVID, we would have expected to have seen in the strategy. If I take you through the strategy, I think it's Appendix 2. I think it's page 77 if you're scrolling down on the PDF, or it's page 5 of the actual document. I thought it would just be useful to take you through some of the areas and themes that we've identified. So if we turn to, as I say, page 5 or page 77, depending whether you're looking at a hard copy of Appendix 2 or the PDF. And as you can see, our vision, the long-term strategy for the local housing strategy, our long-term strategic vision is that all residents in the Vale have access to good quality, suitable housing and can live happily and independently in vibrant, sustainable communities. And members will be aware that that's very similar to the strategic aims within the corporate plan more widely. So what the strategy does, it sets out our vision for housing services and how we're going to deliver housing in the Vale for the next five years. I've mentioned the challenging, as you go through page 5, the challenging issues that we faced. But moving on to then page 6, we talk about the aims. So the strategy has 4 key aims. Firstly, more homes, more choice. So effectively, we'll come to that a little bit later. There are a number of key objectives that we need to look at in terms of delivering the strategy. Second key aim, improve our homes and communities, so our existing stock and trying to create more sustainable communities. Thirdly, to provide better housing advice and support. and finally, equality of access to housing and our services. The document then runs through the key partners, and it talks around a lot of the strategic context that I mentioned just a moment ago, around the national policy, our local policies, and our own strategic planning, and within the housing department itself, the work that we do around the local housing market assessment, our homelessness prevention strategy, our empty homes strategy, and our gypsy and traveller accommodation assessment. If we have a look at the document itself, on page 10 of the document, there are the facts and the figures. So some of the detailed data and information that we've taken into account in arriving at those strategic aims. So we talk about the housing supply, and again, members will be acutely aware of the figures that that are identified there. So the in terms of house building in the area, we note there, for example, for 2019-20, 917 homes were identified to be and were completed in that period. And we note that there was a rise in housing completions during the previous strategy, from 272 in 2014-15 to 917 in 2019-20. We move on then in terms of, well, how did that translate in terms of social housing? So again, that you can see that during that time frame, in terms of additional affordable dwellings to be provided, 897 units were identified to be delivered. And then there's some information then in terms of how those homes were to be built, whether it was private developers, whether it was the RSLs, and also a breakdown of the type of accommodation that was actually built. We go on then to talk around how many of those homes were delivered via social housing grants, and you can see during the period 406 homes were delivered in the period utilising Welsh Government social housing grant. We talk around population changes and projections, and we recognise in there an issue that we will have by 2035 in relation to older persons, but we also recognise the difficulty that we have, and has been exacerbated by COVID, in terms of single person households. And members will be aware that we have used that evidence in the past to influence, in terms of new build, a proportion of properties that are built are suitable for single person occupation. On to the page 14 of the document, we talk about housing demand. Now, the report refers to the Local Housing Market Assessment 2019. We're currently reviewing that. We are required to do that every 2 years. The initial drafting of the Local Housing Market Assessment 2021 is virtually complete and will be reported to Cabinet shortly. But given that as I say, this is probably a somewhat retrospective look in terms of it was looking at the position in 2020. The key figure that you can see that jumps out to us there is that the Local Housing Market Assessment identified an additional 890 units of affordable housing per year over the 5-year period between 2019 and 2024, of which nearly 800, just one short, 799 units should be social rented and 70 units of intermediate rent. So we recognise in there that there is a huge gap between the supply of housing and the demand for housing, and it's no surprise that at the moment we're over 6,000 people now on the Council's Homes For You waiting list for accommodation. We go on to talk about property condition, affordability, and that's been in the news, hasn't it, very recently. The Vale is a very expensive area to live in. house prices during the last 18 months, 2 years, have risen dramatically. And I'm not sure about inquiries from your residents, but certainly we've been trying to access private rented accommodation, for example, in the Vale of Glamorgan, and what we've seen in the last 2 years is a dramatic increase in terms of the rent levels that landlords are now expecting for accommodation in the Vale. I saw something very recently, a 3-bed house, a 3-bed property in the Jenner Road area, £900 a month. Only 2 years or so ago, we might have been looking at between 520 and 550 for a 3-bedroom house. So huge demand for rented accommodation and a huge problem in terms of supply, which is fueling those increases. Moving on, we also then talk about the general economy, and I raised it in the previous speaker's presentation. We are also mindful that, you know, there are huge difficulties and problems coming down the track in terms of financial poverty and issues around energy, unemployment, and everything else. And the strategy is mindful of that as well. Just to pick up then on the objectives, what are the objectives of the strategy and under those key aims? Our first aim, which was more homes and more choice. So in terms of the higher level objectives, we want to make sure that we've got a functioning housing market. That covers off some of those points that I've just mentioned in terms of house prices, economic factors, income and unemployment, and understanding those, and what's our enabling role in ensuring that the market in the Vale of Glamorgan works as well as it possibly can. We've got several levers available, which are mentioned in that report, from information that we provide in terms of housing need and demand, whether it's grants, whether it's our planning powers, or whether it's some of our legal and regulatory powers through SRS, or our statutory responsibilities in relation to homelessness. Under that, I won't go through the actions. There's over 60 actions that supplement those key objectives, and you can see from the report that they are highlighted. Those actions will form part of an action plan once the draft strategy has been agreed and adopted by full council. The second point there is about increasing housing supply. We know that we have to increase supply. We're doing everything we can as a council, not only to speed up the building of more affordable council housing, but also working strategically with our RSL partners to work with them to deliver more affordable housing on sites, maximising the use of our rural exception sites, but also maximising the social housing grant that's made available to us. Thirdly, develop the supply of private rented accommodation and improve access. I've just mentioned that. Fourthly, provide housing solutions for the rural Vale. And we've been, I think members will be aware that we've been fairly successful. We've been one of the most successful local authorities in Wales to actually deliver affordable social rented housing for people in the rural Vale to enable them to remain in those areas. Hugely successful, utilising lettings policies which concentrate on prioritising those residents first. In the news today, I think you may have seen that Welsh Government have made some funding available for some authorities where they're having issues with regard to second homes and holiday homes. And we're also mindful of the fact that we need to provide housing for those more rural communities to let young people remain living where their connections are with their networks and their social networks. Moving on, fifthly, about delivering appropriate housing. So we've identified there's a need for more older persons accommodation. We undertook a a strategic survey a few years ago, which has identified, as I say, a huge demand for that type of accommodation going forward, and also specialist and supported housing. And we are continuing to work with partners to ensure that there is more of that accommodation available. Moving on again then, aim 2, which is to improve our homes and communities. So again, the key objective to improve the quality of our housing across all tenures. Secondly, support for our town centres. Returning empty homes to use, and I know that you've had a number of reports to this scrutiny committee which talks around the way that we intend to do that. And investing in our communities. So I think this is a recognition that, you know, local authorities and registered social landlords are more than just landlords. And Frida will talk to you later on this evening around the role of community investment and its activity. And we're more than just a bricks and mortar approach. And our community investment strategy and our tenant engagement strategy, which hopefully you will have an opportunity to look at this evening, can help to achieve that aim. Aim 3 was better housing advice and support, and the key objectives there: make sure that the public have access to high quality housing advice, that we prevent homelessness wherever possible, and we provide sustainable solutions. We were the most up until COVID. We were the most successful local authority in Wales in preventing homelessness and providing alternative solutions. Clearly, that's been extremely difficult to achieve in the last 18 months, clearly because of the numbers that we're dealing with and the fact that we have to house people as a result of the pandemic. Enable access to the right type of housing. And that goes about the fact, as I say, we don't have enough single persons accommodation for single people. Equally, we don't have enough larger accommodation either for large families. The vast majority of the social housing stock in the Vale is traditionally 2- and 3-bedroomed accommodation. So we've been looking at those and how we can deliver better housing that's the right type at the right time for people. Provide support to enable people to develop and maintain their capacity to live independently. And I think this is a huge focus, not just for us as a housing authority, but you know, independent living is something that we all strive, and you know, as you and I would want to do for as long as we can. And this is about how do we enable that to happen, and that's around adaptations, the right type of housing, the right type of support to enable people to continue to live independently for as long as they can, and for as long as it's safe for them to do so. Moving on then to the last aim, equal access to housing and housing services. And this is about us recognising the needs of our residents. We're in the middle of undertaking a tenant profile survey, for example, which will assist us in understanding who our tenants are and what their needs are. Eliminating discrimination, harassment and victimisation. So one of the key factors for us is about reviewing all of our key policies and procedures in line with our current legislation as a key action. And finally, that key objective, responding to the diverse needs of people in the Vale of Glamorgan. And we highlight a number of groups there, a number of diverse groups who live within our communities in the Vale, and that we need, as part of the strategic document, to provide for their needs going forward into the future. We've been really successful in terms of assisting the UK government's resettlement programme, as members will be aware, both in terms of the Syrian situation and now the Afghanistan situation, and we are the council is a critical ally and supporter of assisting those families into accommodation. We recognise the challenges that gives us, though, as a local authority, because, as I mentioned, we don't have enough housing for all the people that need the housing that we do have, and we're working really hard with in those instances with looking at other options such as private renting, but being mindful that we have responsibilities for all members of our community, not just those necessarily currently on our waiting lists. I think that's a quick whistle stop tour. Just the last thing in terms of monitoring, the report is indicating that we bring the action plan back to Homes and Safe Communities Committee on an annual basis for you to have an update in terms of where those actions are and what has actually happened. And in terms of the actual day-to-day operational oversight of the action plan, that has traditionally been undertaken by an overarching housing forum, which includes all of the key partners that deliver those strategic aims and actions, overseeing that, and we meet on a quarterly basis in order to review our progress. So the report has been referred from Cabinet for Scrutiny Committee for your consideration for any views. The report will go back to Cabinet to any views that you do have will go back to Cabinet. Cabinet then will refer the report on for adoption by full council. It's not a document that the executive can agree. It has to go to full council for adoption. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Does anybody have any questions? My God. Oh, wow. Okay, Councillor Perks, I thought we were going to have a silent room then. Go ahead. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. I just wanted to ask Mike, I know that the priority is for us to try and build 1- and 2-bedroom properties because that's where the most need is. I just wonder then, from the people who are in the 1- and 2-bed properties, what is the demand then, if they've their lifestyle changes, the family size changes, of wanting to move on into bigger homes? What is the demand for that, if you're able to tell me? Thanks.
Thank you, and I think that's really important. I mean, I back in the 80s, I remember a lot of developers building starter homes with bedsit type accommodation, which was a challenge, because certainly for the providers, because people were moving fairly regularly after as their circumstances changed, or as you say, their life history was changing. There is a demand. There is movement from 1-bedroomed accommodation into alternative forms of accommodation. It's probably not as high as you might think, given a significant number of the single people that the council has statutory duties for are vulnerable people and have other challenging issues. Let's put it that way. It's more usually a case of ensuring that those tenancies are sustainable and long-lived. There is movement, but it's gradual movement, and Homes and Safe Communities Task and Finish Group, I know, will have looked at this issue in detail, a lot more detail, and there may be recommendations that flow from that group with regard around designation of existing homes, because what we know is we can't build enough housing quickly enough to deal with the statutory duties that we currently have. So there are certain things that we need to look at. Yes, single people do move out. It isn't a major issue in terms of, I would say, anecdotally, it's not a major issue in terms of large numbers moving in and out of accommodation and creating that sort of high turnover problematic block of flats or estate where there are large numbers of smaller units. That isn't what we're seeing. There remains huge demand for one-bed accommodation.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chair.
No worries. I don't have any questions, but I can see Councillor Nugent-Phin has put her hand up. So if you'd like to go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mike. Mike, in terms of the Welsh Government sort of and local government LDP, is the needs aligned? Do you feel that they're aligned in terms of what we're expected to build and in terms of the actual demand? I totally get the need for the 1 bedrooms, and I know that plays a heavy part in it, Mike, but is there an alignment?
Yeah, the need that's identified in the local housing market assessment, the 900 odd units that I mentioned earlier, invariably will never be delivered via the LDP on a year-by-year basis. So yes, there is a mismatch in terms of the number of homes that the LDP will deliver year on year or throughout its term, and the numbers that we identify. What our strategy and the housing market assessment do, however, is to ensure that the accommodation that is built influences, for example, we talked about regulating the housing market, ensures that, for example, developers are required to provide a proportion of affordable social rented housing or affordable housing on their schemes. Now, we've been really successful in delivering social housing on private schemes using the policies within that derived through the LDP. So in summary, are they aligned? Yes, they are aligned. However, it's always the figures that we identify in terms of the backlog need in the housing market assessment will never be delivered because, you know, instead of the 8,000 or whatever homes we were talking about, there'd have to be 50, 60, 70,000 homes a year built in the Vale of Glamorgan, and there just isn't enough land supply for that anyway.
Yeah, and everything that comes with it. Yeah, I understand, Mike. Yeah. Thanks very much for taking the time to answer it. Thank you, Chair.
No problem. Okay. Apologies. Sorry. Slight frog in my throat then. Okay, so thank you, Mike, for that report. Are we happy for this to go back to Cabinet? Yeah?
Yes, Chair.
Okay.
Can I just double check?
Yeah.
Double check, Chair. So just to make sure, in terms of going back to Cabinet, are we just asking Cabinet to consider the comments made, or just that if it's been noted, or?
Consider any comments made, I believe. Yeah. I can see people nodding.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I'll put that as a recommendation then. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So item number 6 now on the agenda, which is the draft tenant and leaseholder participation strategy 2021 to 2026. I believe that is you, Farida. Am I right? Or is it Mike again?
No, it
is.
It will be Farida.
It is, yes. Apologies, I was on mute and speaking to myself. Evening all. So the purpose of this report really is to introduce to the Scrutiny Committee the new tenant and leaseholder participation strategy. The original report was taken to Cabinet with a recommendation that it be referred to this committee for scrutiny before it goes out to public consultation and then signed off and back to Cabinet for sign off even. So the papers that you should have in front of you should be the Cabinet report, the tenant and leaseholder strategy, and the equality impact assessment. Unfortunately, for some reason, I'm not able to access the link and find the papers online. So I'll be using my own papers, and I might not actually refer you to the strategy document. I'll see how I get on, because I can't actually see the document. So if I refer to the report in the first instance that went to Cabinet then, so in summary then, the new tenants and leaseholder strategy sets out the vision for Vale Homes in increasing tenant and leaseholder participation. And one notable change is in the title of this strategy, in that we've included leaseholders. Prior to this, our strategy was called tenant participation, and this has been included following internal staff consultation, and the need that has been recognised to ensure that tenants and leaseholders' voices are heard. So we've made sure that this strategy encompasses both tenants and leaseholders' views. Within this strategy, there are 3 key themes and one overriding cross-cutting theme. And I'll talk about the themes. So the first theme is to increase tenant involvement and leaseholder involvement. The second is to invest in staff and financial resources to help aid that participation. The third is to support tenants and leaseholders to help them influence decisions, as ultimately this is what the tenant and leaseholder participation strategy is about. And the overarching theme then is to ensure that tenants and leaseholders' views are listened to and acted on. And to help us deliver these key themes, we've developed a really comprehensive action plan that touches on each of these themes, and also then states how, what, when, and who is actually going to take them actions forward. So the action plan and the strategy is actually owned by an internal staff working group, and also the tenant working group, representatives of which we have around this screen or the table this evening. And oversight, it is anticipated, will be provided by this scrutiny group. It's anticipated that we will report on this strategy every 6 months, as well as the equality impact assessment. And just by way of background, the Welsh Government first introduced tenant participation and mandated local authorities and social housing providers to produce local tenant participation strategies in 2007. And in the Vale, this is the 4th successive tenant participation strategy, and each strategy has built on the lessons learned of the previous one, and this is no different. In 2021, last year, we started work on developing this new strategy in the form of a cross-departmental working group within housing. And we also consulted with our engaged tenants in the form of our working groups, and also have posed a number of questions via our tenant profiling exercise through tenants that are not engaged in our tenant participation structures. We also looked at our strengths, our weaknesses, some of our opportunities, and also threats. And we took on board Welsh Government guidance on tenant participation and leaseholder participation and good practice in that regard. We recognise that we need to include options for digital participation. We don't actually do that at this point in time. We've been forced into that, I guess, with COVID more recently, and the action plan takes account of that. And we will be making some inroads into digital tenant and leaseholder participation. We've taken on board critical feedback that we have had from our STAR Tenant Satisfaction Survey. This is a survey that is conducted biannually. It captures the tenants' sentiments and feedback. And these 2 pieces of information that has been critical are that we identified that there was a 7% decrease for from 73% to 66% in the area of Vale Homes, listens and acts on tenant views, and that is critical to any tenant and leaseholder engagement strategy. There was also a decrease of 8% from 78 to 70 on the area of keeping tenants informed. And these two areas are really critical for tenant and leaseholder engagement, and specific actions have been identified in this new action plan to reverse that decline. So given all of the above, we within Vale Homes set our vision of the new tenant participation strategy, which is to create a culture where we develop and maximise opportunities for tenants and leaseholders to contribute towards tenant and leaseholder centred services. So I guess that's an overview of the cover report that was sent to Cabinet. I'll now refer on to the actual strategy, but I can't actually see it. So I know that as part of the strategy, we've dedicated about 27 pages to the background, context and data and around the rationale of what we will be doing and why. We've dedicated 8 pages to actual actions that we will be taking forward. I mentioned that we've got 4 themes with this strategy, and in our action plan we list each of the themes, and under each of the themes we have identified some internal cultural actions that we will be taking forward internally to ensure that we can support a culture of increased tenant and leaseholder participation. Work has already started on the action plan. A couple of things I can talk about that we've already started doing is discussions on launching a new service quality assessors group, which will look at scrutinising our services. So the first piece of work that we'll look to do is scrutinising our gas servicing process, and then moving on to ASB, for example. We, in addition to the strategy that you have before you, we have had to produce our first equality impact assessment in relation to the tenant participation and leaseholder strategy. And before this point, we've not really done any equality impact work. And in preparation for this strategy, we were able to establish that 74% of the tenants engaged in our tenant participation structures were aged 65 and above. We also identified that 89% of those people that were engaged in our tenant participation structures were white, English or Welsh background, and 92% of those engaged are from a heterosexual orientation. So the work that we've started in terms of establishing a baseline of who is involved in our tenant participation structures will provide us a really good baseline for us to report on every 6 months. I think that is a really quick whistle-top tour of the approach that we've taken and some of the actions that we're taking forward. I'm more than happy to look at the strategy in detail with you, but I'm conscious that you would have read this, and I'm more than happy to take any questions from anybody if they have.
Thank you, Farida. I can see that Julie has a hand up. Go ahead, Councillor Aviett.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Farida. I was on tenant engagement long before I was a councillor. I'd just like to ask, do tenants and leaseholders have to be part of a residence board now? And can individuals just join because they're a tenant or a leaseholder? And then how do you kind of, well, I'll say recruit, but, you know, how do you kind of attract participants? Thank you.
One of the things that one of the actions that we have identified in this new strategy is that we're going to look at our current engagement structures Typically, people first become a member of a tenant and residence group, and then they get involved in other groups. However, one of the actions that we've said that we will undertake as part of this strategy is completely relook at the structure of engagement. In terms of leaseholders, we currently don't have a leaseholder engagement group. We will be looking to launch one of them groups. We have identified a number of different ways in which we will be looking to engage with our tenants and residents. One of the things that we have been doing in the St Luke's and St Paul's estate in Penarth is that we've been undertaking a community development project which is called Clean Slate, and it's all about engaging with the local community to instill community development principles, but also to get them engaged in actions that we take in their local environment to make it more cleaner, more greener, more healthier, more connected. And as part of that, we're engaging with our tenants. That's not part of any formal engagement structure, but we are engaging with our tenants and we are taking their views on board. So what you will see in the next couple of years is different types of informal engagement, and it won't necessarily be through the formal engagement structures that we have. And likewise, we might have digital surveys that we do. We currently work very closely with TPAS Cymru. They regularly send out questionnaires via something called the Tenant Pulse Surveys, and each local authority is able to send this information out to their tenants and residents. And we have been sending these questions out to our tenants and residents in the Vale, and we've had the highest return to TPAS in terms of feedback to TPAS on a whole range of things. So there's different ways in which we are going to be looking to engage with our tenants and residents going forward.
Thank you, Farida. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay, I see no hands going up. Well, thank you very much, Farida. That was very informative and quite concise and eloquently put. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Chair, in terms of recommendations...
I know, I'm just having a look at my notes. I was just going to say, in terms of the recommendations, what were you going to say, Mark?
No, you go ahead, Chair. I was just obviously just to confirm if anything was going back to Cabinet, or if a committee were just endorsing a note in the report, or did they want to bring any comments back?
I was just looking at my notes, and there have been a couple of comments regarding the the leaseholders tenant group and that. So, is everybody happy for the recommendations be that this goes back to Cabinet with any comments added? Have I got anybody objecting to that?
No, happy for it to go back, Chair.
Okay, seconder? Okay, so that will go back to Cabinet. So, thank you. Agenda item 7 now is the revenue and capital monitoring for the period 1st of April to 30th of November. If Carolyn would like to come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The first part of the report relates to the revenue budget, and in a similar manner as in previous months, we are projecting that the service will outturn within the target budget. Appendix 1 to the report outlines the savings targets for this year for this committee, which is 6,000, and this has been achieved. The report then goes on to outline changes to the capital programme. Now, the most significant are slippage requests relating to the housing improvement programme, and the reasons are detailed under each scheme heading in the report, and total 11.66 million. In part, these relate to problems in the supply chain and the need to revisit projects due to increased project costs and material costs. So these schemes will be delivered. However, some of the works will start this year and will actually go into next year. So as I say, they will be delivered. It's just a sort of a phasing issue that we have here and a timing issue. So the financial implication of this is that there will no longer be the need to raise loans this year, so there will be a saving on loan costs. Also, the level of revenue contributions to capital will reduce by around £4 million, and this will therefore result in an underspend on the HRA revenue budget, which in turn will result in the balance of the HRA reserve increasing at year end to a higher position than has been planned. However, this situation will be addressed in the next production of the housing business plan, and this will be presented to Cabinet in February. So it's sort of it's a temporary issue, but what we will do is we will take it into account when we're projecting forward in the new plan. So that's sort of a highlights of the report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, Councillor Hanks.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to ask about CCTV and how long negotiations are going to go on with the police and the commissioner. They seem to have been ongoing for years now. And I also wondered in the forward programme, which comes up later, if we could have a presentation on this item and see where we're going, please. Thank you.
Chair, would you like me to respond to that?
If you could, Mike, thank you.
Yeah. So I think we recognise that Councillor Hanks's concerns are echoed across the Vale at the moment. We know that we have a deteriorating CCTV service. We're currently in contract with Bridgend Council. And previous reports to Cabinet have identified that we need to renew the CCTV stock that we have, but also recognising the fact that at the moment only the council supports the CCTV service in terms of revenue and no other agency or partner does. That stimulated a discussion with the police through the Police and Crime Commissioner, and those discussions, as a result of which a strategic, an all South Wales strategic CCTV group was established together with a number of operational groups. Those discussions have culminated in a support in principle from the police and the PCC, an indication that they are prepared to revenue support an upgraded CCTV service in the Vale, and as a result of that, a commitment was made by the council to provide capital funding. Originally, I think it was £350,000, but during the period of the pandemic, we have been procuring dispersed cameras, mobile cameras, to deal with some of the issues that we face, certainly in our resorts over the summer period in the last couple of years. In terms of directly answering the question, for the last couple of months, I've been told a decision from the PCC is imminent. Clearly, they were waiting or awaiting an indication, I suppose, in terms of their funding position going forward. And of course, there were the PCC elections last year as well, which I would suggest probably delayed a final decision. The last information I've had from the PCC, and I've actually written to them as late as last week, asking for clarity as to when a business case is going to their executive board. I haven't had a response to that email that I sent last week, but previously had been advised that that was imminent. We are preparing in terms of, because we have capital grant available, some of which will be Welsh Government capital grant and is time limited. We're currently preparing in terms of the purchase of hardware and the cameras and the capital infrastructure. we're currently preparing. We, as an officer group, we are having conversations with Cardiff Council because Cardiff are investing in a new hub, monitoring hub, and it makes sense for us if we are investing in a renewal of our infrastructure and as a key partner in terms of the relationship we have with the police indicated that they would support revenue funding if there was a regional approach adopted. So we've been pursuing that. We have been in conversations with Cardiff Council. We have an understanding on what the revenue costs would be, and we're about to start having informal discussions around contracts and service level agreements and all the minutiae that goes ahead with a contract of that nature. I can't give you a direct answer. I don't know when the PCC are going to make a decision. We continue to press for that decision. We have a meeting of the Community Safety Partnership on the 1st of February, and it's an agenda item that we will raise again directly with the representatives from the police and the PCC at that meeting to try and get a firm decision and conclusion. But at the moment, we're operating on the basis that revenue is forthcoming. However, as I say, at this stage, I can't guarantee when that's going to be. But what I would say is the service will continue. So in the interim, we're also continuing to discuss with Bridgend an extension to the current contract so that the current CCTV service will exist pending a decision to transfer to Bridgend or Cardiff in the future.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I know with technology moving on and it gets cheaper as well. When I joined the council about 5 years ago, there was talk of maybe having it in-house as well. You know, it's a lot of money, 350,000. You can buy an awful lot of equipment, and maybe it's better to just go down the mobile. And I just wondered, had you considered keeping it in-house as well, rather than... The only thing I feel is if you go to Cardiff, you're in the same situation again as we're in Bridgend. The Vale is so small in comparison to the larger areas of Bridgend and the large areas of Cardiff. So just food for thought.
Yes, Councillor, I think we have, when we were considering the options, the future options, we have considered, you know, that as one of the options. There is a cost clearly associated. There was a huge revenue cost previously to the council when we operated our own CCTV monitoring service, and there was a substantial revenue saving when we collaborated with Bridgend. The direction of travel, I think, certainly at a strategic basis across Wales, is that we should move to regional centres. I think, you know, having 7 local authorities all effectively having their own monitoring services, all engaging their own staff to do that, with the police potentially travelling back and forth between monitoring areas, was not seen as the most efficient way to look at coordinating the service going forward. In terms of the issue with Cardiff, one of the ways that we're looking to address that is to have a viewing station actually based at Barry Police Station. So in terms of the issues and difficulties that the police and officers have had in actually having to travel to Bridgend in order to view footage, won't be an issue necessarily looking at this system, because technology has moved on, and the idea would be that there would be the ability to view CCTV footage locally to get around that issue. And I suppose in terms of the problems or issues that we might have had with Bridgend, we will look obviously to address those in a sort of tripartite agreement, I suppose, given that we're hoping and expecting the police to contribute to the revenue. Actually having an agreement or an in-principle service level agreement that we're all happy with, where service expectations are clearly understood and what happens if those service expectations are not met.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? I don't see any other hands up, but I just want to say thank you very much, Carolyn, for this. Apologies. Sorry. I did ask in the agenda conference about the delay in the projects that are starting. You said they're going to start this year and go on into next year, and I just wanted to ask for clarification on that. I take it that is because there's been delays in getting materials and costs have risen and things like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, you okay, Mike? Do you want to take that one? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that. There have been a number of issues. My own staff, for example, we've had issues with COVID ourselves as in terms of having staff available to actually draw together contracts associated with that. Issues with contractors. You can see from one of the capital contracts we put the contract out to tender and we had no bidders. And we've seen that, contractors are having their own issues in terms of being able to deliver significant capital projects and having resources to do so. And on a number of occasions, we've gone out to tender. The contractor hasn't been ready to commence the work and has then eventually come back to us and said, because of cost price inflation, issues around supplies and services and materials, that they're no longer able to stand in relation to their submitted bid, which has resulted in us then having to restart the whole exercise again and go back out to tender, which again has added a considerable delay. But going back to that point, the vast majority of the capital works will commence this year. We have entered into contract now with we're having a number of pre-contract meetings. Works will be starting shortly at the end of this month on some of the contracts, a bit later on then into February on others. But yes, the vast majority will start, but of course they won't complete in this financial year. So we need the funding in the programme, the capital programme, to slip into next year to cover those major capital programmes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the recommendation on this, if we have no other questions, at last chance for questions. Okay. No hands going up. All right, so the recommendation is that we consider the position with regard to the revenue and capital budgets for 2021 and 2022. Are we happy to note? Well, I'm not hearing any objections.
Yes, I'm happy to note.
Okay, thank you. All right, so thank you very much, Carolyn.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. As always. Go and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. So the next item is the update on the dark service. If you'd like to come in now, Benny. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So the report shows progress on the dark. It focuses on the first 2 quarters of the financial year. Since its launch in 2018, I know the dark has been presented to Scrutiny on a few occasions, so I know you're familiar with the service, but just by way of a refresh, DARC stands for Domestic Abuse Assessment and Referral Coordinator, and it's a service that works in partnership with South Wales Police to receive all standard and medium consenting PPNs, which are the public protection notifications that are issued by South Wales Police every time they visit a domestic abuse incident. So the DARC service receives those PPNs and works in partnership then with other departments within the council, notably children's services, education, and external partners, probation, health, and South Wales Police, to gather information and build a picture of that victim and their family in order to be able to really tailor the support that's offered and the referrals that are made with the victim's consent as well. So the DARC services has demonstrated a kind of excellent ability to provide referral and support to standard and medium PPNs who previously wouldn't have had that level of attention given to them, as the focus historically and traditionally has always been on high risk victims of domestic abuse. So The first two quarters of 2021-2022 saw 343 referrals to the team. Now, this compares with 838 PPNs received in the first two quarters of the previous year. That big reduction in PPNs is a reflection of a change in protocol that occurred as a result of the change in BCU, South Wales Police BCU merger. So it saw the police force in the Vale of Glamorgan no longer be merged with Bridgend and merge instead with Cardiff. So this meant that the team receiving the PPNs were receiving the PPNs from a different risk assessing team within South Wales Police, and there was concern that where PPNs did not provide, where victims didn't provide consent at the point of the police officer visiting, that there was a GDPR issue with South Wales Police forwarding that PPN onto the dark service. So the issue is currently being dealt with under the governance of the Community Safety Partnership, of the Safer Vale Partnership. And really we're looking at kind of taking a joint approach to how we can unblock this issue, whether there are changes that need to be made to information sharing protocols. Because obviously from our perspective, we're very concerned about what might not be being offered to victims who haven't provided their consent at the point of a visit from South Wales Police. I think it's important to note as well that at this point, the whole use of consent is something that's being considered at a South Wales Police-wide level. Exactly for that reason, I think there's concern that asking a victim to consent at that point is not a reliable or an effective time for a victim to be considering when other issues will be so much at play. I mean, they're complex issues, and there's often fear that referrals will be made to children's services where they might not want them to be made, and so on and so forth. So back to the performance of the team. In the last two quarters of 2020-2021, there were 366 referrals. So I've just added that to indicate that the reduced number is consistent with what we would expect in a two-quarter period, thereabouts. So of those 343 PPNs, 298 were medium risk and 18 were standard risk. This is comparable with previous quarters and is roughly what we would expect to see. There were 34 repeat cases of domestic abuse that were standard and medium with consent, which compares with 38 across the same time frame. Not a large reduction, but still the direction of travel that we would be wanting to see, and certainly that we were kind of hoping to see it start to emerge slowly, because obviously things take a lot of time with the implementation of the dark service. Across those two quarters, 78% of cases were perpetrated by a partner or ex-partner, and 7% were perpetrated by a son or stepson. I highlight that one particularly because it's something that we've seen gradually increase over the last couple of years. So it's something that we're keeping a close eye on, just to make sure that some of the intricacies that might emerge from the difference in relationship versus the kind of more traditional, or the more expected partner or ex-partner perpetration are considered, and that our services can tailor for those needs and any differences that creates. And that trend is one that's also being observed in high-risk cases. So it kind of feels like it's happening across the board. During COVID, meetings were held between colleagues in housing, supporting people, and the specialist service at Talifro to make sure that any spikes in the need for refuge accommodation or other housing-related issues were picked up quickly and dealt with effectively. So those meetings have ceased now. But what it has done is kind of, just maybe formalised or opened up more communication channels than there were even prior to COVID starting, which has been really positive. And one of the things in particular that's been developed over these two quarters is an information sheet that is shared with housing colleagues regarding some of the pertinent issues on the number of cases, some characteristics, and the levels of risk that we know are victims within local authority housing stock. So we know that 18% were victims within those first two quarters of the year, the financial year. And This enables us really to make sure that we're all working together, and that so to give an example, if a victim isn't paying rent, that housing colleagues might be able to be aware of the fact that that might be due to a problem with financial abuse or an issue that requires a bit more complex detail. So it's just a way of working together that just ensures that we have some more robust safeguarding at its core. The community safety team, the DARK service, have also been working with the violence prevention unit following research that was issued last year, indicating that there had been an increase in violence in school settings among children, and that was thought to be linked to increases in exposure to domestic abuse during the lockdown periods. So we drilled down the figures, working with the violence prevention unit to kind of see what that meant for the Vale. And I've included the graph in the report, which you'll see are very, very low numbers, which then make it very difficult for us to infer kind of statistical significance. But needless to say, it's something that we're looking at, and other conversations are being had with education just to make sure that if there are trends beginning to emerge in terms of aggression, increases in aggression or increases in other types of behaviour in children, that we would need to monitor, that we're able to do that and have those conversations. And alongside that, and very much linked, has been an additional kind of task and finish group created with our safeguarding colleagues and children's services colleagues to look at the fact that there is a lack of provision for children in who are either victims directly of domestic abuse or who are involved in families where domestic abuse is present, and to kind of look at more robustly collecting the data around that and developing proposals for services that would be that would meet that gap and would support that need. One of the other changes that has occurred with that task and finish group has been a change in the way that we collect our data. So rather than just collecting data on the children who are involved with the domestic abuse PPNs that we see, we also collect data on whether or not they are repeat from 2 months in the last quarter or in the last 6 months, to really develop the kind of pattern that's happening around that child, and to better understand their risk in terms of repeated offences and general numbers when it comes to children. In relation to data collection then, one of the other changes that we have made is to the protected characteristics data that we collect, and for equality and diversity. At the beginning of the DARK project or its implementation, it was felt that more or less was more in terms of what we were asking victims when we speak to them, which is still very, very recently is not long after their domestic abuse incident. But we've come to realise that actually collecting ethnicity and disability information is really important in being able, in allowing us to be able to collect the information that will enable us to make sure that we have services that are responding to the needs of the Vale, and that we're seeing the kind of numbers that we would expect to see, and that there aren't pockets of our community that aren't represented and that are therefore potentially more at risk, and where some engagement work might need to be done. And then in relation to sort of other violence against women, domestic and sexual violence developments, we continue to make progress against the national strategy. A refresh of this is now out, which we will be
Benny, you've put yourself back on mute.
Sorry, don't know why that happened.
It just does.
It just does. It's scary, isn't it? Thank you, Chair. The tendering for the recommissioning of the Violence Against Women, Domestic and Sexual Violence Specialist Service was successful, and a 3-year contract has been awarded to Atalifro, who were the previous provider of the service. So they're well established in the Vale and well known among local services. And we were successful in obtaining additional funding for another IDVA, which is an independent domestic violence advocate. And referring back to the points that were being made around funding for children's services, we've also had indication of successful funding from the PCC for a CHIDVA, which is an IDVA for children. And so the idea with this, we're hoping, is that with the new Drive service, it's been running for a year now, which is the service aimed at working with perpetrators, the IDVA who will work with the victim and a CHIDVA who will work with the children will be able to have a whole system and a whole family approach to safeguarding and to supporting high-risk victims of domestic abuse. And finally, during the quarter, there was a very encouraging increase that has been consistent actually in the last year. We've targeted engagement into the promotion of Clare's Law, and we had 43 applications that were made to Clare's Law in that period in the first 2 quarters, which is a really encouraging increase because it's just seen as a really simple yet effective way to safeguard people from potentially becoming victims in the future. And that concludes the report, really. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Benny. Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Chair. As domestic violence champion for Vale Glamorgan Council, I'm always glad to see the reports that come from the DARK project and how well that they're doing, but also what are other things that need to be done as well. I've got a couple of questions for you. Basically, with the schools in lockdown and the reports that come through to the DARK project re children being in the homes where domestic violence has taken place, were the reports then sent to the safeguarding officer of the schools, and what sort of follow-up was carried out once those reports had been processed? And the other one was, do we know when the report for the Task and Finish group into domestic violence and safeguarding of children is going to be available? Thank you.
No problem. So for the schools in lockdown report, it was a South Wales Police Violence Prevention Unit report, and it's something that they are working on as a South Wales Police initiative to address across the whole of South Wales throughout lockdown. I think I didn't see some of the figures, but I think in some of our larger cities, there were much higher figures that they are probably focusing on at the moment. That was part of the reason that we asked for a drill down into the figures, which was given to us, and then we shared it with our safeguarding education leads, and that's kind of triggered the conversations that we're having around whether or not this is something that is being seen within the school setting, and whether there are if it's being duplicated, if it's being if these trends are being emerged. So it's really something that's being monitored and watched as an ongoing initiative at the moment. And in terms of the safeguarding Task and Finish group, a report can absolutely be drafted. The meetings so far have the Task and Finish group have met a couple of times, and it's really been looking at how we change our data sets, what services we have available, that kind of initial scoping of what's available in the Vale, what could be missing, and to look at the data. Our colleagues in Safeguarding and Children's Services have been looking at because where domestic abuse is present within children's services isn't something that's immediately obvious through the figures, because it's not something that it's not how they categorise children at risk within children's services. It's just a flag, or it's within the kind of context of the story behind the individual. So we've been looking at that, looking at kind of how we can make it so that it's easier to see who is a victim of domestic abuse and who isn't, and kind of creating it as a risk factor, a risk flag in itself, or a categorization in itself. And so the CHIDFA funding was awarded very recently, and is something that Atalifo will be looking to take on and recruit on now. The job advert should go out hopefully in the next week or so. And I think following that, the Task and Finish group will probably cease in its current form, and what will come afterwards is a monitoring service for that CHIDFA role. So at that point, we would be happy to write a report that can come back to Scrutiny, if that would be helpful.
Yes, that information would be helpful, and I was pleased to hear that Atalifo got the renewed contract for this, because of the fantastic work that they do on this as well. Okay, thank you very much for your replies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Aviott and then Councillor Hanks.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's great, all the work that Dark is doing, but I just want to know, I was a victim for 10 years, you know, my, abusive ex-husband, and he beat the children as well. I just want to know, when Dark knows or identifies domestic abuse, how many agencies do you tell? Do you tell the schools? If they're council tenant, do you tell council tenants? Do you tell social services? I just want to know how many are you allowed, to tell when you've identified for sure this is going on.
So it's on a case-by-case basis, which is one of the really important things. I think it's one of the real successes of the DARK project, because it's able to take that really tailored approach to the individual. So where children are concerned, children's services are alerted, and where it is felt that a child is at risk. So the basis for sharing with or without the consent of the individual is whether or not it is felt that there is a child at risk, in which case the PPN is shared with children's services. The PPN is also shared with education, and that's a development of the DARK service, which has been a real success in being able to know a bit more about whether or not children are affected by domestic abuse in a way that we would never otherwise know. So that has created a kind of link up in information and the picture around what's going on. And then in terms of who the referral goes to, that's very much something that's decided between the victim and the DARK coordinator. So the victim speaks with the DARK coordinator, and based on the services, so the information that the DARK coordinator will have gathered through the investigations that they do with databases and with other partners, with the support of other partners, is based on kind of looking at what the best referral could be for that individual, based on who they or what they're already engaged with, based on the issues that they are saying that they have and the support needs that they might require. And then referrals will either go to substance misuse services, to mental health services, to the specialist domestic abuse service, to particular sessions that some services offer. I think the domestic abuse team work really hard to constantly update their repertoire of services and programs across the Vale. Because as we all know, it can be financial, the problem can be it can be related to drugs and alcohol. I mean, there can be such complexities that referrals there needs to be a good breadth of services available to be able to refer people to. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, just is that all the person's consent, with the person's consent?
Yeah, so with the person's consent, yeah, unless there is belief that children are at risk, where a referral will be made to children's services, other referrals to other support agencies will be made with the consent of the victim. The advantage with being able to have a conversation which didn't happen previously, is the DARK coordinator is in a position to be able to speak with the individual and provide some of that really important contextual information about what a referral entails, and what, some of that kind of reassurance work that is stuff that's really obvious to us who work in the system and who know the services really well, but to people who might never have had any experience of services available, it could be really daunting and really scary. So just a bit of kind of reassurance and background work is helpful in also kind of gaining consent, or supporting victims to know whether or not consent is the right thing or non-consent is the right thing for them.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Hanks.
Thank you, Chair. Benny, I was just asking about Clare's Law, an application. How long does it take for it to turn around and the information to go back, please?
That is a good question that I don't think I can answer reliably, but I can definitely find out and let you know in the next. Let you know tomorrow.
Yeah, it wasn't urgent.
But it's pretty
it was
quick.
Just interesting to know. Yeah, it is it? Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. I do have. Okay, come on in then, Gina.
I'm terribly sorry, but Chair, I do have to go now because there's a bit of trouble in the next room. Grandson won't go to bed without Nanny.
Oh, okay. If
I am so sorry.
Yeah.
I have the same problem. Sorry.
I had my nephew here earlier, so I know all about that.
Yeah, I had to go. I am very, very sorry. Thank you.
No
anyway.
worries.
Thank you. Good
for
night.
coming, Gina.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, so I do have one question. You mentioned the funding for the Chidva. How many are you hoping to get in the next couple of years? Are you hoping to get more funding and increase the numbers? Or is it just the one you're getting for now, or?
Well, we're ever hopeful for more funding for more Chidford. I think we've identified this as a real gap, and so it is needed, and more than one is definitely needed as well. But for now, the funding that's been received from the PCC for this, that is enough for one, and probably not full time either. But it will enable us to pilot the work and to refine the service delivery spec that we want in order to be able to apply for more. So that's definitely something that's on the cards.
Okay. That sounds encouraging, I have to admit. Yeah, one is good. It will give you a chance to, as you say, pilot it and smooth out the rough edges. And once you've got more of an idea, you can apply for more funding with more information and proof that it's working. Yeah. So that'll increase your chances. That's good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Does anybody else have a question? Okay, so the apologies. The recommendation on this is that we note the performance of the dark service for the period, and that we consider the work undertaken to improve services for those affected by domestic abuse in Wales. Are we happy to note that and go on to the next item?
Yes, Chair.
Okay.
Yes, happy to know.
Brilliant, thank you. So the next item is the agenda item 9, third reports from the Managing Director, third quarter scrutiny recommendation tracking 2021 to 22, an updated committee forward work programme schedule 21 to 22. If you'd like to go ahead, Mark.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Committee. This is our regular quarterly report that comes to committee around the progress in relation to the Scrutiny Committee's historical recommendations and his updated forward work programme schedule for 21-22. On the report, we have a number of appendices. Appendix A is the third quarter recommendation tracking for October to December 2021. We also have Appendix B, first quarter recommendation tracking April to June 2021. And also for Appendix C, we have the 2019 to 20 uncompleted recommendation tracking. With regards to Appendix C, that now is in essence the recommendation around the report identifying an appropriate housing solution for the travelling community. That is currently still ongoing, and I know Mike at our meeting in October did provide a further update on that. So I think at this time, unless there's anything else from you, Mike, on that one, that's still ongoing. Is that correct?
No, it's still ongoing. I suppose the only update I could provide is that the council have just started the process of concluding a new Gypsy and Traveller Needs Assessment, and that work has just commenced, which will provide obviously an evidence base in relation to the numbers of Gypsies and Travellers identified in the Vale of Glamorgan, and of course the statutory requirement for us to provide for the identified need that follows from that. In terms of the previous Cabinet report, there was a Cabinet report that Mark has just referred to. The Cabinet report, there were two actions in the Cabinet report. One was to continue to explore the options with regard to the existing site that travellers are located at Hayes Road, but alternatively also to look at alternative options and suitable sites, and that work is continuing with colleagues in planning and housing.
Okay, thank you, Meg. Just to follow on from that, as well as obviously those decision tracking appendices, we also have an Appendix D, which is the current or most up-to-date committee forward work programme schedule for 2021-22. Obviously now we're in the last quarter or so of that. By and large, most of the reports have come through. We've had a couple that have obviously had to slip to following months, but by and large, most of the reports have been produced for the committee. In essence, for the recommendation, basically there's two recommendations off the back of this report. The status of the actions that we've already alluded to in appendices A to C to the report be agreed, and also that the updated committee forward work programme schedule attached to Appendix D be considered for approval, and if it is approved, uploaded to the council's website. That really sort of, in essence, sort of a very quick summary of the report and the appendices. And obviously open it up to yourself, Chair, and the committee for any questions or any queries that you might have.
Thank you, Mark. Do we have anybody want to ask any questions? Oh.
Just double check, Chair. I know Councillor Hanks mentioned something earlier with regard to the forward work programme.
Yes.
So I don't know if that was still wanted to still raise that, Councillor Hanks, or not, or was it?
I was
resolved?
just saying that I was bringing it up because it was in the report, but I also noticed that it was in the Forward Works programme for a presentation. So I'll leave that up to Mike when he feels he's got something to report back to us, I think, if you're happy with that, Mark.
Yeah, that's fine, Councillor Hanks. If you haven't got any extra sort of request or recommendation, we will obviously leave the recommendations as is if committee are happy with them.
Yeah, I'm happy.
I'm happy with them. Are we happy to take the recommendations? So, yeah.
Yes,
okay.
Chair.
So that's both the recommendations on agenda item 9. Everybody happy, yes? Okay.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. I just wanted to double check. Okay, so I have no other items. And so all I can say now is thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for all everybody for the hard work in the reports and the presentations we've had tonight. It's been much appreciated. And I would just like to remind you all now that the next meeting is scheduled for the 9th of February and 6 p.m. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.